Welcome to CTV News Trendline with Michael Stittle and Nik Nanos.
Nik, the Canadian economy appears to be flattening out as Canadians are still struggling with cost of living. You've been tracking the economic mood of Canadians and how optimistic they are, especially about their personal finances. What have you learned?
Dour. They're Michael, dour. They're very pessimistic. We track every week. We ask Canadians a pretty simple question. Are your personal finances, or are you better, worse, or the same compared to a year ago? And we tracked this over time, and check out the trend line. We're hitting basically new lows that we haven't seen for a really, really long time. Only 11%. That's 1 out of every 10 Canadians believe that say that their personal finances are better off today than a year ago. That compares to 50% who report that they are worse off today than a year ago. This is a killer stat, right, for any incumbent government. Michael, remember, were you around during the Nixon-Kennedy debates?
No, not quite.
Okay, sorry. I just like to say you're looking sharp.
Thank you.
Neither was I. But in the famous Nixon-Kennedy debates, John F. Kennedy said, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" And he said, if the answer is no, then it's time for a change. And it's pretty clear right now that Canadians believe that they're worse off now than they have been, at least for the last 10 years, coincidentally, the same period that the Liberals have been in power. And it speaks to why this is important. It's hard for a government, any government that's been in power, especially for a long period of time, to fight something like this. So I think unless Canadians start to feel better about their personal finances, it is going to be very difficult for the Liberals to turn this around.
We've seen Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre just hammer the Liberals over cost of living and the situation with many Canadian households struggling to pay grocery bills. The Liberals had a big chance to sort of counter this with the most recent federal budget, and really, Nik, I think the big headlines out of it were the increase in the capital gains tax. Yeah. You've also done a survey about how Canadians feel about that.
Yeah, and you know what? The budget hypothetically is an infomercial for the government of the day. Governments of the day have these budgets, and in this particular case, Justin Trudeau did what I'll say the dance of the seven veils. I'm sorry if that offends some people, but anyways, now I can't erase that from my memory. Sorry. But leading up to the budget, he basically pre-announced a lot of things in order to try to jumpstart momentum in favor of the Liberals. And, it included lots of spending, but it also included a change in the capital gains tax and how it's calculated. In a survey that we just completed and released for Bloomberg News, we asked Canadians how they felt about the capital gains tax, and actually there is division among Canadians. 45% of Canadians, not a majority, but 45% believe that it will lead to decreased investment because of the environment that it creates. 38%, so just 7 points back, believe that it is fair and that would help close the income disparity gap between Canadians, and then the rest, I think it's about 17%, were unsure. But I think for the Liberals, considering they had about $50 billion in spending, I think they're probably hoping that they'd be able to get some political juice out of the spending, them trying to help Canadians kind of get through things. But I think that's been erased by a debate over the capital gains tax and pushback, especially from businesses and corporate Canada on the capital gains tax.
Nik, you mentioned disparity. I know Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland said that this would really target the top 0.1 something percent of the wealthiest Canadians. But that was the way it was sort of advertised, I suppose. But I think there's also some questions about why the capital gains tax is being delayed and how long it's going to take action.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to impact more than 0.013 or very few Canadians. Like anybody who's got a cottage, I'd like to say I don't have a cottage, so I'm not conflicted on this one. But if you have a cottage or a family cottage, this capital gains tax could directly impact you. And you know what? Canadians love their cottage. It's part of Canadian culture. You know, like if someone really wanted to take a run at this, they call it the cottage tax just to really rile up Canadians. But, you know, I was interestingly last week, I was speaking to an economist on this, and that particular economist says, well, there's a potentially politically clever impact that the Liberals have introduced by having a bit of a period between when this kicks in, because many times, not all times, but many times when the government introduces changes to the tax system, they're effective immediately when the budget is announced. Hence, budget secrecy, right? But what this economist, as they explained to me, said was this delay will probably initiate for a lot of Canadians, say if they own a cottage, they might try to sell their cottage under the old rules so that they don't have to pay as much capital gains tax. Also, Canadians that might own shares that they could realize a capital gains on might sell their shares and then repurchase their shares afterwards. And the way this economist explained to me is that there could be a short-term tax windfall for the federal government. No one knows how much it might be. The one estimate that this person said was between $5 to $10 billion, and that this will allow the Liberals in the fall to say that the deficit is lower, but this will basically be explained by Canadians front-loading taxes in order to not pay a higher rate. So there could be a political reason for this particular delay to explain why they've done this, because it'll be good for the Liberals and it'll be good for any government to come back for a fall economic statement and pat themselves on the back to say that the deficit is smaller. But this will be, I think, and if this economist is correct, primarily a result of sequencing and people front-loading taxes in order to avoid a higher rate.
Nik, if the deficit does show a decrease, that this possibly, you know, achieves its effect, and let's say inflation starts to cool down, and the Bank of Canada starts to cut interest rates, do you foresee the Liberals being in a better position to politically, or do you think Canadians are still looking for more pocketbook initiatives from them?
Well, I think they're still looking for pocketbook initiatives, and the Canadians, you know, the time for change is it's hard to fight, and it happens for every government after they've been in power. Let's face it, Trudeau's been in power since 2015. Like, you know, next year it'll be 10 years. So big surprise that they hit a best before date. But, you know, I think for the Liberals as a party to be competitive, if the economy is a little better, if interest rates are low, which will help kind of people paying for housing and housing affordability. And if they can show that they've, you know, that the deficit or the debt is a little more under control than it has been in the past, it gives them, what do we say, half a foot to fight on, because it's still going to be very difficult. But it creates basically an environment where they can say, you know, and I wouldn't be surprised if they say stuff like, listen, you know, we helped Canada survive Donald Trump. We helped Canada get through the pandemic. Now we've helped Canada get through this other difficult time, and things are going to be a little better. And it might help, you know, for those grumpy Canadians who are worried about paying for the groceries in the next 30 days, it might make them a little more open to voting Liberal, but it's still going to be tough for the Liberals. Anyway, you cut it.
Nik, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll look at the latest ballot tracking and political strategy.
Super.
Nik, we've seen a pretty strong lead from the federal Conservatives over the Liberals in ballot support. What's the latest?
Latest Nanos tracking just out. Conservatives, 42%, up 4 points in the last 4 weeks. Liberals 24, down 2. NDP 16, down 3. Bloc at 7, down 2. Green Party at 5. People's Party at 3. 18-point advantage for the Conservatives. Hey, you know, we just had a federal budget. Where's the bump? No bump for the Liberals or for the New Democrats coming out of the federal budget right now. And I think whatever could happen with the federal budget, people aren't going to change their minds, and like new momentum is not going to magically appear, because usually if the numbers move, they move immediately after the budget, or on like literally a day or two after the budget is announced. So 18-point advantage for the Conservatives, and they've had this advantage since last August. So yikes, it's going to be a hard trend line to change.
Nik, when you've had a double-digit lead for this long, how does that change your overall political strategy if you're hoping to form the next government?
You mean like for the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre? Usually, if you have an 18-point advantage, you focus on how do you consolidate that advantage. One of the ways to consolidate the advantage is to look prime ministerial, because with an 18-point advantage and a sustained double-digit advantage over the last number of months, people are now looking at Pierre Poilievre as, and rightly so, a potential prime minister, and the Conservatives as a government in waiting. So usually the strategy is, let's look prime ministerial. Let's not look risky. Let's make sure that Canadians are comfortable with this change, and that it's not risky change. But we haven't seen that yet from Pierre Poilievre. It's kind of like he's still got his greatest hits in terms of his, what do we call it? Catchy, snappy snippets of slogans. What do we call that?
we saw him removed from the House for using unparliamentary language. I think Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has been using a strategy where he's calling out the Conservative leader for meeting with let's say questionable people. I want you to listen to this moment, Nik.
Mr. Speaker, the leader opposite is showing us once again what he will do to try and earn votes through personal attacks. He shakes the hands of a leader of a white nationalist group, then goes to actively court the support of the group's members and thinks he can get away with it. This is a group that advocates for violence against US LGBTQI+ Canadians, against Hindus and Sikhs, against Muslims and Jews. Diagolon stands against everything we stand for as Canadians, and yet he will not denounce them or what they stand for. That is shameful, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, that, like everything else he says, is false. He uses fear and falsehood and this latest distraction because he doesn't want to face the fact that he has become so extreme and radical that even the BC NDP is distancing themselves from his decriminalization of crack, heroin, meth, and other hard drugs in hospital rooms, causing nurses to have to stop breastfeeding their babies for fear that their contaminated air might end up in the breast milk of the baby. Why won't he ban these drugs?
Nik, do you think the Conservative strategists will steer Poilievre towards more of a, I don't know how to say this, prime ministerial image? What do you think?
Well, I think they have to do that. They have to do that eventually, because even when people want change, they still don't want risky change. It's kind of funny. Listen to that exchange. It was kind of like, what was it? Mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the most extremist of them all? Is kind of, that's, and, it's kind of ironic. The twist, Michael, is that when we ask Canadians to place themselves on an ideological spectrum of 0 to 10, the vast majority are still a 4, 5, or 6. They're pragmatic. They're middle of the road. And, I think for many Canadians, they probably feel that they have been abandoned by both the Conservatives and the Liberals. But this speaks to where the battle lines are currently drawn. So if you're 20 points back, I think you're going to be like throwing mud, rocks, sticks and stones, everything that could break Pierre Poilievre's bones. And I just like to say there's an alliteration that I just did.
Very nice.
Not to say that I'm a pollster rapper, but who knows where that could go. But that's so am I surprised that Justin Trudeau is saying stuff like that? No, he's 18 points back. He's got to say stuff like that. And he's got to be sensational in order to try to make people feel uncomfortable. But for Pierre Poilievre, does he really need to amp it up? And I think he has to worry about making a mistake, because the reality is that the one person who can defeat Pierre Poilievre right now is Pierre Poilievre. He has to watch out to make sure that does not emerge a pattern of behavior where people will go, man, I really want the Liberals out. I'm not hot on Justin Trudeau, but why does Pierre Poilievre have to say those things? So, and I think this is what I think this is a bit of a trap for the Liberals that they've laid for Pierre Poilievre. The trap being they want to get him as many times as possible to kind of say things that might sound out there, and then there'll probably be some kind of attack ad, that the Liberals will have. In the same way that Pierre Poilievre is building up his clips, like the clip machine, the clips that he wants to use to attack the Liberals. I think now what we're seeing is what the Liberals are doing to build their clips for the attacks that they're prepared or want to make on Pierre Poilievre. That said, we should conclude a comment on this by saying, however, if Canadians are struggling to pay for the groceries, they're probably angry at both leaders. It'd be like, what are you doing, slinging mud at each other and saying who's the extremist when people are struggling to pay for the groceries and they're struggling to pay for housing. So I think both have to watch out that people are just angry at both of them.
Nik, just a little bit more on the Liberal side of this. They've been trailing by double digits since August. They've done everything they can, but throw the kitchen sink at this, and they still haven't managed to change the narrative or gotten any traction. What do you think they need to do at this point?
Well, the Liberals there has to be a pivot. I think the reality is, the last budget was the 2015 Liberals' greatest hits, except on steroids, and throw in a little capital gains tax. And you know what? The capital gain tax is part of the Liberals' greatest hits, because if you remember back in 2015, Justin Trudeau and the Liberals said that they would tax and focus on the 1% of top earners in order for them to pay their fair share. So we shouldn't really be surprised with this capital gains initiative that they pushed forward. That said, what's clear to me, at least from a polling perspective, is that the greatest hits won't work. They need to, not reverse themselves on things, but they need to say that they want to focus on issues and how people are going to pay the bills and stuff like that. Because right now, the Liberal strategy is like palliative care. Like, let me help you ease the pain of what you're doing. Well, they're easing the pain of Canadians through this, but fundamentally, we still need to create jobs, meaningful jobs that are well-paying jobs that are good enough for people to pay the bills. Actually, that's the problem. The problem is the economic context. The fact that the Liberals are having these programs to help Canadians manage does not solve the fundamental problem. And I think the Liberals have to focus, and I would say the Liberals and the Conservatives have to focus on policies that speak to how do we create a stronger economy that creates a living wage where people can pay for the bills and creates prosperity so that we can maintain our standard of living. We haven't heard that from either one of the parties, but realistically, that's what we need to focus on.
Nik, I think we'll leave it there. As always, thanks very much.
Take it easy.